The rain hammered against the windows like a warning the world refused to ignore. It was the kind of storm that swallowed sound, drowned hope, and washed away whatever innocence still clung to the night. Elena Moretti stood in the middle of her father's study, her trembling hands wrapped around the sleeves of her thin sweater as thunder rolled across the sky. The room smelled of old books, whiskey, and fear. Fear most of all that her father sat behind his mahogany desk, shoulders hunched, his hair damp from the rain he'd walked through before rushing home. His eyes were red, whether from sleepless nights or the guilt eating him alive, Elena didn't know. She only knew that he wouldn't look at her. Not fully. His gaze kept dropping toward the papers in front of him, the ones that would end her life as she knew it, standing opposite him. Silent and still as carved stone was Dante Romano. The name alone made men lose their courage. The Romano family controlled Chicago's underworld like it was their personal empire. And Dante, young, powerful, lethal, was the heir everyone whispered about but never challenged. He was tall, dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit that soaked in the faint golden light of the room. His dark hair was slicked back, his jaw sharp, his posture relaxed in a way that came only from knowing the world feared you, but his eyes cold gray. Watching everything were the reason Elena felt a shiver crawl down her spine. He was not angry nor impatient. He didn't need to be. His silence alone held power. Elena's father cleared his throat, the sound cracking like brittle glass. "Elena, please, you have to understand." His pen shook as he lifted it. "This is the only way to save us." "Save him," she corrected silently. "Not us." Not her father's business had crumbled after a series of bad investments and even worse alliances. He had borrowed from the Romano family thinking he could outsmart the devil. He had been wrong, Dot, and now the devil wanted payment. Elena swallowed hard, her heart pounding against her ribs. "You're giving me away," she whispered. "Like property." Her father finally looked at her, then really looked, and she saw the devastation in his eyes. "I'm sorry," he breathed, voice quivering. "I have no choice." But he did. He was choosing himself. Dante's gaze shifted toward her, slow and deliberate. "He is choosing survival," he said, his voice a deep, unreadable calm. "And so are you." Elena lifted her chin, refusing to tremble in front of him. "Marrying me won't change anything," she said. "You don't even know me." Dante stepped forward, the slightest shadow of a smirk touching the corner of his mouth, something between amusement and warning. "I know enough." His eyes moved over her, not hungrily, not cruelly, but with an unsettling certainty, as if she were a puzzle he had already solved. "You're quiet, but not weak," he said. "Innocent, but not naive. Beautiful, yes, but beauty doesn't interest me." He paused. "Strength does." Elena felt her breath catch. She didn't know whether to feel insulted or terrified. Her father signed the last page with a shaking hand. The pen clattered to the desk. The papers were done. Her fate was sealed. Dante reached for the contract and folded it carefully, like he was wrapping a gift. He looked at her once more, his voice soft but merciless. "You belong to the Romano name now. Your old life ends here." Thunder roared in the distance. Elena's fingers curled into fists at her sides. The fear, the betrayal, the suffocating despair, they threatened to swallow her whole. But beneath them, something stronger flickered to life. Not defiance. Not yet. Resolve. She felt it settle inside her like a blade forged in fire. She is no longer a daughter, no longer free, no longer hers. She is a debt, but she would not break. Not for her father. Not for the Romano name. Not for the devil standing before her. As Dante Romano offered his hand to seal the agreement. Elena lifted her chin higher, meeting his gaze without flinching. If she was being forced into the dark, then she would learn how to survive in it. even if it meant becoming just as ruthless as the man who claimed her. The storm had barely faded when the black Romano car stopped outside the Moretti house, and Elena was taken toward a future she never chose, her heart racing as the city lights blurred past the window, each mile feeling like another chain wrapped around her wrists. She sat in silence, trying not to let fear show on her face, because she knew Dante watched everything, even when he looked away. The church stood tall and glowing under the morning sky. Reporters already flooding the steps, their cameras flashing like hungry lightning. Guards in dark suits formed a wall around the entrance, and the whispers floated everywhere. The Mafia heir is taking a bride. The girl is being sacrificed. No one knew the truth, but everyone fed on the rumor. Inside the bridal room, Elena sat before a large mirror, her white satin gown flowing like spilled moonlight, her hair pinned with trembling hands by the women assigned to her, each movement careful, controlled, rehearsed. She felt like a porcelain doll being dressed for display, instead of a woman walking toward her own fate. Her father hovered by the doorway, unable to meet her eyes. He muttered broken apologies under his breath, but they sounded hollow because nothing could undo what he had given away. Not even month. The door opened and silence swallowed the room. Dante stepped in wearing a black suit that matched the danger in his eyes. His presence filled the air like smoke, thick, suffocating, impossible to ignore. His gaze swept over Elena slowly, as if cataloging every piece of her soul. "You look beautiful," he said in a voice smooth and calm. Yet something beneath it warned her that beauty was not what he truly cared about. She met his stare with steady eyes and whispered, "You look dangerous." A faint smile touched his lips. "Good." "You are learning." He offered his arm, and she hesitated, not out of fear, but out of instinct. Something inside her whispered that taking his hand was the moment her life would no longer be her own. But when she saw the guards waiting behind him, she realized refusal was only a dream. She could not afford the doors, open to a bright golden aisle lined with roses and curious eyes. Every step she took echoed in her chest. The guests leaned forward as if she were a spectacle. The Mafia princess forced into a union with the devil. Elena felt the weight of every stare carving into her skin. The priest spoke, his voice distant, drowned by the pounding of her heartbeat. He asked the question that sealed destinies. The room held its breath. Dante stood beside her like an unmovable shadow, his gaze locked on her, daring her to refuse and promising consequences if she did. Her throat tightened, the world blurred. But her voice came out soft and steady. "I do." The church erupted in applause, but Elena felt only the cold grip of reality tightening around. Her Dante leaned close, his breath brushing her ear as he whispered, "Good girl. Now smile. The cameras are waiting." She forced a smile as the flash of lights hit her again and again, each one like a blade slicing deeper into her last piece of freedom. After the ceremony, the limousine carried them away, the world outside cheering a fairy tale, while inside Elena felt the cage close. Dante poured 2 glasses of champagne and handed her one, his fingers brushing hers deliberately. "To our forever," he said with a calmness that chilled her more than any threat. "Forever feels like a prison," she replied quietly. He leaned closer, eyes dark and unreadable. "Then learn how to survive in it." White lightning flashed outside the windows as the car moved deeper into the city. Elena realized something terrifying. The marriage ceremony was only the beginning. The real war would start when the doors of the Romano mansion closed behind her, and she would need more than courage to survive the man sitting beside her. She would need a plan, a strategy, a fire strong enough to burn through the darkness. He rolled so effortlessly she sat straighter, her heartbeat slowing into resolve. She made her silent vow right there in the limousine. If Dante Romano believed he could shape her into a quiet, obedient bride, he was wrong. She would not break, not tonight, not ever. The Romano mansion rose out of the darkness like a kingdom carved from shadow, tall iron gates sliding open as the limousine approached. Elena felt the cold air brush her skin when she stepped outside, the silence of the estate thick enough to smother every last trace of hope she carried. The staff lined up neatly as Dante guided her inside, their faces expressionless, their eyes lowered, as if she were something fragile brought to a place where fragility did not survive. Inside the master suite, the world changed completely. Gold accents shimmered under soft lights. A massive bed covered in rose petals waited in the center. The scene looked romantic in a twisted way designed for a night of devotion. But Elena felt no devotion in the air, only expectation, ownership, and the kind of tension that made her. Pulse stumbled. Dante closed the door behind them and removed his jacket with slow, deliberate movements. He didn't rush toward her, he didn't speak. He simply watched her with those cold gray eyes that saw everything and gave nothing back. She tried to breathe evenly, but her chest tightened as she realized there was no one left to defend her. Not even herself. You were shaking, he said quietly, stepping closer, his voice calm enough to unsettle her nerves even more. Are you afraid of me? He asked, not with concern but curiosity, like her fear was something he wanted to understand, not erase. Elena lifted her chin, refusing to let him see the depth of her terror. She turned away from him and moved toward the glass wall, overlooking the glittering city. I just want this night to end, she whispered, her voice barely steady. The city lights reflected against the glass, forming stars across her reflection. She felt like one wrong breath would shatter her. Dante approached her slowly, his presence falling over her like a shadow growing longer. His breath brushed the side of her neck as he whispered, I told you it would not hurt. I told you I would be gentle. She closed her eyes because the tone of his voice carried no promise, only a warning wrapped in silk. She spun around, suddenly fire blazing in her eyes, surprising even herself. You don't have to prove anything to me, she said, her voice trembling with anger and fear. You already own me, isn't that enough? The words hung in the air, sharp and painful. For the first time, Dante's expression changed. Something flickered behind his eyes, a crack in the armor, brief but unmistakable. Guilt or sorrow or something darker she couldn't identify. He stepped back as if her words had touched a place he'd never let anyone see. I don't want your fear, he said, low and rough. I want your obedience. The room went still. Her heart pounded. Tears stung her eyes, but she refused to let them fall then. You will never have my heart, she whispered, and the truth in her voice cut deeper than any blade. Silence stretched between them until Dante moved suddenly, pulling her into his arms, not gently but desperately. His grip firm, as though he was fighting something inside himself. His lips crashed against hers in a kiss that tasted like demand instead of affection. She pushed him away, but he didn't stop. He wanted control, not closeness, possession, not love. When it was over, Elena lay still staring at the ceiling, her body motionless, her eyes empty. Dante sat at the edge of the bed, his back to her, his hands trembling as he lit a cigarette. He inhaled deeply as though trying to calm the storm inside him. Sleep, he said, his voice cold again, the softness gone. Tomorrow you will start learning what it means to be my wife. Elena turned to the side, silent tears soaking into the pillow, her breath shaking as she held in a sob she refused to release. Through the giant window, the city lights flickered like distant stars, watching a girl lose the last piece of her innocence in that moment. Dante thought he had broken her, but he was wrong. Beneath the tears, beneath the pain, beneath the devastation, a new version of Elena was taking shape, a version made of fire instead of fear, and as the moonlight touched her face, she made her second vow. If Dante Romano believed she would live her life as a silent captive, he had underestimated her more than anyone ever had. She would survive him, she would challenge him. One day, the man who ruined her first night would discover something far more terrifying than her fear. Her strength, morning, crept into the Romano mansion without warmth, sunlight slipping through the tall windows like a shy intruder afraid to disturb the silence. Elena woke alone in the massive bed, her body aching not from touch, but from the weight of the night before. She stared at the ceiling, letting the quiet settle around her. A quiet that didn't feel peaceful, but watchful, as if the walls themselves were waiting for her next move. When she finally stood, the cold marble floor bit into her feet like a warning. The mansion was beautiful in a ruthless way, every corner polished to perfection. Every hallway guarded by men who didn't blink unless Dante willed it. Walking through it felt like crossing sacred ground where she didn't belong yet, was expected to obey without question. The maids avoided her gaze, bowing their heads as she passed. The guards nodded cautiously as though she were a fragile object Dante had placed in their hands with strict instructions not to break. Elena hated it. The pity, the distance, the feeling of being something owned, not someone living. She wandered deeper into the mansion, exploring rooms Dante had never allowed her near. Rooms filled with leather sofas and weapons on display. Rooms with heavy curtains and darker secrets. But one door at the end of the hallway caught her attention more than the others. It was Dante's study, the room no one entered without his permission. She stood before it, feeling the air shift around her as if even the hallway knew she shouldn't be there. But curiosity tugged harder than fear. She pressed her palm against the door, and to her shock, it opened easily as though it had been waiting for her inside. The study, the scent of smoke and old paper drifted through the air, a world carved for power and secrecy. Books lined the shelves from floor to ceiling. A decanter of whiskey sat half empty on the desk beside a gun placed with quiet intention. But it wasn't the gun that drew her in. It was the photograph on the desk, framed in simple silver. A woman stared back at her. Dark hair flowing over her shoulders. Eyes bright with a joy Elena couldn't imagine existing in Dante's world. She looked alive in a way Elena had never seen Dante look. Elena picked up the frame, her heartbeat slowing as she traced the woman's smile with her eyes. She was beautiful and real and loved. She could see it in the warmth captured in the photograph. Who is she? Elena whispered to herself. But a voice answered from behind her, cutting through the stillness. Like a blade, put that down, Elena, spun around, breath catching in her throat. Dante stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable, his posture rigid. Something fierce flashed in his eyes, not anger exactly, but a warning. A warning laced with pain. Elena set the photograph down, gently taking a step back. I wasn't trying to invade your privacy, she said softly. I just wanted to understand. Dante walked into the room slowly. Each step controlled his gaze, locked on the picture before flicking back to her face. There are things in this house you're not meant to touch, he said, his voice low. Things that don't concern you. Elena swallowed her fear, forcing herself not to look away. You loved her, she said quietly. And for a split second, Dante froze completely, as if her words had hit something deep beneath his armor. Love got her killed, he replied, finally, his voice hollow. Elena's breath caught. The emotion in his tone was raw, restrained, and dangerous. He turned away from her, gripping the edge of the desk hard enough that the veins in his arm tightened. Go to your room, Elena, he said. Don't ask about her again, but Elena didn't move. She watched him closely, seeing the storm beneath his skin, the grief buried in shadows, the guilt wrapped around his heart like chains he forged himself. I didn't mean to hurt you, she whispered. I just wanted to know what made you this way. His jaw tightened. The muscles in his shoulders stiffened, but he didn't face her again. Leave, he said, the words shaking slightly. Elena stepped out of the study, her heart racing, but this time not from fear, from understanding. Dante Romano was not just a monster. He was a man built on broken pieces that cut anyone who got too close, and she realized something dangerous, something powerful, something that sent a shiver through her chest. The more she learned about him, the harder it became to hate him completely. And Dante sensed it too, which was why the door slammed behind her. A moment later, a silent warning to stay away from the very room that held the key to who he truly was. The days that followed carried a tension Elena could feel in her bones. The mansion watched her like a living creature with secrets carved into its walls. Every step she took felt heavier than the last, as if Dante's world was slowly pulling her deeper into something she could not escape since. The moment she stepped into his forbidden study, Dante had changed. Not in ways the guards or staff noticed, but in the small cracks only she could see. He avoided her more than usual, yet appeared when she least expected him. His eyes followed her with a storm she couldn't read. Anger or fear or something else tangled beneath his control. Elena felt it every time their paths crossed one. Evenings, she found herself walking through the dim hallway again, drawn by something she couldn't name. The mansion was quiet, the kind of quiet that hummed with danger. She stopped outside the study, remembering the photo. The look in Dante's eyes, the way his voice broke when he said love got her killed. She turned to walk away, but a sound made her freeze. A low muttered curse drifting from inside the room, even though she knew she had seen Dante leave the mansion an hour ago for a meeting. Curiosity tugged harder than fear again, so she stepped closer to the door, slightly ajar inside. She found Dante, not the icy, powerful Mafia heir she had seen at the wedding, not the man who tried to command her obedience, but someone different, someone human. He sat at the desk head and his hands elbows resting heavily. The silver photo frame lay beside him, turned face down as though he couldn't bear to look at it. Elena's breath caught quietly in her throat. She didn't mean to spy, but the sight rooted her to the doorway. There was a brokenness in him tonight she hadn't seen before, a man torn between the world he controlled and the memories that controlled him. Before she could slip away, the floor creaked under her foot. Dante's head snapped up and his eyes collided with her sharp gray and filled with something she didn't recognize at first. Fear, maybe, or vulnerability, or something more dangerous than both. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice rough but not cold. She stepped into the room slowly, unsure how to explain the pull that brought her back. "I heard you," she said quietly. "I thought you left." Dante leaned back in his chair, studying her the way a man studies a storm coming toward him. She expected him to order her out again, maybe even yell, but he didn't. Instead, he looked at her as if he was deciding whether to push her away or let her step closer to a part of him no one had touched since the woman in the photograph. After a long moment, he said her name softly in a way that surprised them both. "Elena." She moved closer, drawn by something deeper than curiosity. The air between them shifted heavy with unspoken truths. Who was she? Elena asked gently, knowing the question could shatter everything or open a door she wasn't ready for. Dante's jaw worked as he tried to choose his words, his eyes drifting to the fallen photograph. "She was the only good thing I ever had," he said finally, his voice low and breaking. "She was innocent, she didn't belong in my world, and because of me she died." Elena felt a pain she couldn't explain tighten in her chest. Not jealousy, but understanding, a recognition of loss. Dante stood slowly, walking toward the window, the city lights casting shadows across his face. "Every choice I make ends in blood," he said quietly. "Every person I try to protect suffers." She didn't know I left her until it was too late. Elena stepped closer, her voice steady despite the tremor inside her. "Maybe you didn't destroy her, Dante. Maybe the world around you did. You blame yourself because it's easier than believing someone else took her from you." Dante turned to her sharply, his eyes burning, not with anger, but with shock, because no one had ever spoken to him that way. "You don't understand," he whispered. "I destroy everything I touch." Elena shook her head, her gaze locked on his. "Then why am I still standing?" she asked quietly. Silence pressed around them, thick and heavy as Dante stared at her, something shifting in his expression, something neither of them had the strength to name. The distance between them disappeared without either of them meaning for it to happen. He reached out slowly, as if his hand moved against his will, his fingers brushing her cheek gently in a way that didn't match the man who had taken her wedding night. "You don't know what you're inviting into your life," he said, his voice trembling for the first time. Elena held her ground, her breath soft, her eyes steady. "I'm not inviting anything," she whispered. "I'm just not running from the truth anymore." And in that moment, Dante realized something terrifying. This woman he had thought of as fragile was becoming the only person capable of unraveling. Him and Elena realized something just as dangerous. Every time she stepped closer to Dante Romano, she stepped further away from the life she once knew and deeper into the darkness of his world, where love was deadly and trust was a weapon. Neither of them stepped back. Neither of them spoke, but everything between them changed in that fragile breath where his fingertips lingered against her skin and she didn't flinch, and somewhere deep inside them both an invisible line was crossed. One they could never return from. The night carried a strange calm when Dante insisted Elena accompany him to a business meeting on the outskirts of the city. He didn't explain why he wanted her there, but the look in his eyes told her it wasn't for show. It was something else, something he didn't have the courage or clarity to name. The tension between them had shifted since the moment in his study. Something dangerous and fragile hung in the air like a thread stretched too far. The car ride was quiet. Only the hum of the engine and the distant rumble of traffic filling the space. Elena sat beside him, feeling the energy radiating from him, sharp and protective. His fingers drummed slowly against his thigh as if he sensed something wrong long before she did. When they reached the abandoned industrial road, Dante stepped out first, scanning the surroundings with the cold precision of a man who lived too long in danger. His men surrounded the car, forming a wall of dark suits in silent readiness. Elena followed him, her footsteps echoing against the cracked pavement. The wind carried the scent of rain and rust, a mix that made her chest tighten. "Stay close." Dante said quietly without looking at her, his voice low but laced with warning. She moved beside him, matching his pace, her heart uneasy. Something felt off the air too. Still, the shadows too thick, the silence too heavy. Before she could speak, the world exploded. Gunfire ripped through the night, tearing into the cars, shattering windows and sending sparks flying. Elena screamed, instinctively ducking as Dante slammed into her, pulling her to the ground with a force that knocked the breath from her lungs. "Stay down," he barked, shielding her with his body as bullets tore through the metal above them. His men returned fire, the sound deafening, the scent of gunpowder burning in the air. Elena's hands shook as she pressed against the cold pavement, trying to focus on breathing as the chaos raged around them. Dante's arms locked around her, holding her in a way that wasn't possession this time, but pure instinct, raw and reckless. When the ambush eased, Dante dragged her toward the tree line behind the road, pulling her through the darkness until they were hidden behind a fallen log. Blood ran down his arm, dripping onto the leaves, but he ignored it. His gaze focused on her face as if she were the only thing that mattered. "Let me see your arm," she said, breathless, trembling, reaching for him, but he pulled back, gritting his teeth. "It's nothing," he muttered, but the pain in his voice betrayed him. Elena tore a strip from her dress without hesitation, pressing it against the wound, her hands steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. Dante hissed under her touch, his jaw clenched, but he didn't push her away. Rain began to fall, soft at first, then harder, washing away the blood between them, soaking their clothes cold and heavy. Elena's hair clung to her face, her breath shaky but determined. "You should hate me," Dante said quietly, his eyes searching hers through the rain, his voice softer than she had ever heard. "Maybe I do," she whispered, "but I don't want you to die." And that truth hit him harder than any bullet for the first time. Dante looked at her, not as a possession, not as a debt, not as a reminder of what he lost, but as a woman standing in the middle of his violent world, refusing to break. He reached up, brushing a strand of wet hair from her cheek, his fingers lingering as if he didn't trust himself to touch her. "You not what I expected, Elena Moretti," he murmured, his voice trembling slightly. She met his gaze, heart pounding, and asked quietly, "What did you expect?" "A broken doll," he said, "not someone who fights me at every turn." She almost smiled, a small sad curve of her lips. "Then maybe you never deserved a doll." A breath escaped him, something between a laugh and a sigh, something he didn't know how to feel. Their faces were close, too close, the space between them shrinking with every heartbeat, every drop of rain. Dante leaned in slowly, his breath warm against her lips, but he stopped just short of touching her. "I shouldn't," he whispered, his eyes heavy with conflict. "But you want to," she breathed, and he closed his eyes as if her words were too much to bear. He didn't kiss her. Instead, he pulled away, turning his face toward the darkness, his chest rising and falling with uneven breaths. "You're dangerous," he murmured. "You make me forget who I am." Elena felt something shift inside her, something deep and frightening, the kind of feeling that could destroy everything or save them both. As the rain poured harder, soaking them completely, she understood with terrifying clarity. The man who had shattered her was slowly learning how to feel, and the woman he had tried to break was becoming the only thing strong enough to change him. The mansion had been strangely quiet since the ambush, a heavy silence settling over its walls like a warning only Elena could hear. Dante had healed enough to walk again, but something in him had changed. He watched her more than before, his eyes following her softly, intensely, as if she were a question he couldn't answer. He no longer barked commands, yet he didn't offer comfort either. He existed in a space between danger and longing, and Elena felt trapped in that space, with him unable to escape the pull. One morning, she stepped into the garden, needing air after another night of restless thoughts. The roses glistened with dew, the sky gray with the promise of rain. She closed her eyes, inhaling deeply, before a soft, familiar voice broke the quiet. Elena, her heart stopped for a moment. She turned and saw Marco Duca standing by the gates, his brown eyes filled with worry. He looked exactly the way she remembered. From childhood, gentle, protective, the only piece of her past that hadn't dissolved into darkness. He moved toward her as if afraid she might vanish before he reached her. "You disappeared after the wedding," he said, his voice shaking a little. "Everyone is talking, Elena. What happened to you? Is it true? Are you really married to him?" She opened her mouth to speak, but her breath hitched because she already sensed it, the shift in the air, the cold shadow spreading behind her. Dante's presence fell over the garden like a storm. She didn't need to look to know. He stood there watching every heartbeat, every breath. "She is married to me," Dante said, his voice calm but laced with steel. "And I don't remember inviting you onto my property." Marco stepped closer despite the danger, tightening his jaw. "She does not belong to you, Romano, no matter what deal you made." Dante. A smirk was slow, lethal, the kind that sent a shiver through Elena, even when she didn't want it to. "Everything in this house belongs to me," he said, including her. Elena's heart slammed against her ribs, hearing the possessiveness in his voice. She stepped between them, her voice cracking. "He's just a friend," she said. "Dante, stop. He hasn't done anything." Dante's eyes darkened in a way that warned the air itself to freeze. "Friends don't look at another man's wife like that," he said. And the tension vibrated like a blade pulled back, ready to strike. Marco stood his ground, refusing to step back, even with Dante's guards shifting around them. He looked at Elena, not Dante, his voice soft but firm. "Elena, you don't deserve a cage. You deserve your life back." Dante's jaw tightened dangerously, as if Marco's words struck a part of him he wanted to deny. His hand shot out, grabbing Elena's wrist, not painfully, but with a force that sent heat up. Her arm a warning disguised as a touch. "Go inside," he said, eyes glued to Marco. She didn't move, frozen between fear and fury, so Dante lowered his voice, softening in a way that shocked her. "Please," he whispered. That word did more than a command ever could. She obeyed, but her chest ached as she walked toward the mansion, her steps heavy. Through the window, she watched them exchange quiet threats, sharp enough to start a war. That night, Dante found her in their bedroom, the moonlight spilling across the floor. He stood in the doorway, silent, his eyes searching hers with a frustration he didn't bother to hide. You shouldn't have seen him, he said finally. He's my friend, she replied, holding his gaze, even when her voice trembled. He's the only piece of my old life. I have left Dante's expression twisted with jealousy, fear, anger, and something deeper. Your old life is gone, he said, you are mine. Now Elena's eyes filled with tears, but her voice didn't break. Then why does it sound like you're trying to convince yourself? Though words hit him harder than the bullet in the ambush, he flinched almost. Too subtly to notice, but she saw his hands clench, his breath slip. She saw him swallow something fragile and dangerous. He didn't answer, he just turned away, locking himself behind silence outside the gates. Marco waited in the shadows, his fists clenched, his heart burning with one vow, whispered into the darkness, a vow that would change everything. I'll take you. Back, Elena, whatever it costs, and in that moment, unknown to all three of them, the fuse to a war had been lit, one that would pull Elena into a storm more powerful than anything she had survived so far, a war of love, a war of loyalty, a war Dante Romano was not prepared to lose. The night pressed against the Romano mansion like a living thing, thick with tension, heavy with unspoken truths. Elena felt it in every corner she walked through, as if the walls whispered warnings she could not ignore. Since Marco's appearance, Dante had doubled the guards, posted men at every door, and watched her with a silent unease that felt more like fear than control, but fear could not cage her forever. Elena stood at the balcony, gripping the cold iron railing, staring down at the estate below the gates looming in the darkness. Her chest ached with a longing she couldn't quiet, a longing for air, for freedom, for a life that wasn't handed over like payment. She knew Dante believed he was protecting her, but protection that felt like suffocation was just another form of imprisonment. She turned away from the night sky, her decision already made long before she admitted it to herself. She changed into simple clothes, slipping on a dark coat, her breath unsteady, but determined. She crept down the staircase, avoiding the guards, as if the shadows guided her steps, whispering, keep going, keep going. When she reached the outer gates, her heart leapt in her throat, because he was there, Marco, waiting inside a black car engine, running eyes filled with desperation and hope. Elena, he whispered, opening the door for her, get in. We have to go before a voice cut through the night, sharp as a blade. Stop right there. Gunfire erupted behind them, bullets sparking against the metal. Dante's men flooded the driveway, shouting orders. As Marco grabbed Elena's arms, pulling her behind him, run, he yelled, but they barely took 2 steps before rough hands dragged her backward, ripping her away from Marco's grasp. Elena screamed as guards restrained her, forcing her to face the black SUV skidding to a stop across the gravel. Dante, stepping out like a storm, unleashed his gray eyes, burning with a fury she had never seen before, a fury mixed with fear that looked like it might destroy him from within. What the hell were you thinking? He demanded, his voice low, deadly, and trembling, not with anger, but something far more dangerous, something close to heartbreak. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she struggled to breathe. I needed to breathe. Dante, I can't live like a prisoner. Marco fought against the guards, shouting she doesn't belong to you, let her go, but Dante didn't even spare him a glance. His eyes stayed locked on Elena as if she were the only thing in his world. You don't own her. Marco spat, and for the first time, Dante's gaze finally cut toward him, slow, lethal, full of a promise. No one survived, you're right, Dante said coldly. I don't own her, but I protect what's mine before anyone could react. Dante threw his gun aside, the metallic clatter echoing through the driveway as he reached for Elena, pulling her into his arms. Not in anger, not in dominance, but in raw, desperate anguish. If anything happened to you, he whispered, his voice breaking around the edges, I'd lose what little sanity I have left. Elena froze, because it wasn't a threat this time. It wasn't power. It was confession, a truth ripped straight from the parts of him he kept locked away. But the moment shattered in an instant. A bullet whizzed past them, slicing through the air like a warning. Then chaos erupted, gunfire lighting the night as Marco's men launched their attack, a full assault against the Romano guards. Dante shoved Elena behind him, shielding her with his own body. The world a blur of screaming, shouting blood, and smoke. Elena's heart pounded so hard she could barely hear anything else as Dante grabbed her wrist and whispered, "Stay behind me, don't move an inch," his voice fierce, protective, terrified. But the driveway had already exploded into war bullets, flew bodies, lunged guards, crashed against shadows from the trees as the enemy advanced, and in that madness, Elena realized something with a clarity that shook her to the core. The war wasn't between families anymore. It wasn't about power or vengeance or debts. It was about hurt, two men willing to bleed for her, two lives colliding, two worlds burning, and she stood in the center of it. The spark neither of them could let go of. The night was far from over, and the next bullet would change everything forever. Gunfire tore the night open again, the screams, the sparks, the smoke all twisting together as chaos swallowed the Romano driveway. Elena clung to Dante's arm as he pulled her backward, shielding her. With his body, his breath rough, his movements fierce, the world exploding around them. She could barely see anything through the blur of lights and terror, but she felt everything, the warmth of his hand, the tremble in his grip, the way his body positioned itself in front of hers with instinct, not calculation. Dante Romano was a man built for violence, but tonight something in him fought harder than usual, something raw, something frantic. "Get down," he shouted, pushing her behind a low stone wall. As bullets slammed into the ground inches from them, she crouched trembling as he fired back with deadly precision, his eyes blazing with a panic she had never seen in him before. Then it happened. A sharp crack louder than the others, a sound that cut through her like a blade, and Dante staggered backward, his hand flying to his chest, a dark bloom of blood spreading beneath his fingers. Time stopped Dante, she screamed, catching him as his knees buckled, his weight collapsing against her. He tried to speak, but his breath hitched, pain ripping through every word. "I'm fine," he muttered, even though his voice was fading, even though he could barely stay upright. "No, you're not," she whispered, her voice breaking as she pulled him down behind the stone wall. Blood stained her hands, warm, thick, terrifying. She pressed her palm against the wound, desperately tearing fabric from her clothes to stop the bleeding. Dante hissed, but didn't push her away. His men fought back, but Elena barely heard them. The world around her now narrowed to the rise and fall of his chest, the way his eyes fluttered, the way he forced himself to keep looking at her. "Why did you do that?" she whispered, tears falling unchecked. "You could have let me go, Dante. You could have let me run." His lips curved in a weak, almost broken smile. "I couldn't," he breathed. His hand lifted, trembling, brushing her cheek with a gentleness she didn't know he still had, "because every time you look at me, Elena, I remember I still have a heart." Her breath caught a sob escaping her as she pressed harder against the wound. "Stay with me," she begged. "Don't talk like that. Don't you dare close your eyes, Dante." He laughed softly, even in pain, the sound fragile and cracked. "I lied to you that night," he whispered. Her heart stopped. "What lie, Dante?" He swallowed his breath, shaking. "When I said I'd be gentle, I didn't know how," he whispered. "Everything I touch, I destroy but you." His fingers traced her jaw, trembling, barely able to keep his eyes open. "You make me want to be better, Elena." The words broke her wide open more than any cruelty he had ever shown, more than any danger they had faced. She leaned closer, tears running freely. "Then live, Dante, please live and prove it to me." Sirens wailed in the distance, his men shouting that reinforcements were coming, but Dante didn't seem to hear any of it, his gaze locked on her as if she were the last piece of the world he wanted to see. "Promise me something," he murmured, his voice barely a breath. "Promise you won't run again." Elena gripped his hand tightly, her heart cracking in two. "Then stop giving me a reason to," she whispered through tears. He exhaled, a faint smile forming the last flicker of life in his eyes before they finally closed. Elena screamed his name, shaking him, refusing to let go, as the medics rushed in, pulling him from her arms. strapping him onto the stretcher, Dante unconscious, pale, barely breathing. She stumbled after them, her hands covered in his blood, the taste of fear sharp in her throat, the sound of sirens drowning her heartbeat. And as the ambulance doors closed and took Dante Romano away from her, Elena realized something that terrified her more than bullets, more than death, more than the mafia world she was trapped in. She had fallen in love with the man who once broke her, and now she might lose him forever. The Romano mansion felt like a hollow beast without Dante in it, the corridors. Too quiet, the air too heavy, every step Elena took echoing like a reminder of what had been taken from her. 3 days had passed since the ambulance doors slammed shut. 3 days of sleepless nights spent beside Dante's hospital bed watching machines. Breathe for him, watching his chest rise and fall in a rhythm that never felt steady enough, never. Felt safe enough, he lay there pale, still unmovable, the powerful mafia air brought down to a fragile heartbeat. His hand in hers felt cold, even though she held it, constantly whispering prayers. She didn't believe in begging fate. She didn't trust hoping for a miracle. She didn't understand until now, but outside the hospital walls, the city moved like wolves scenting weakness. The Romano name trembled as rumors spread that Dante was dying. Allies grew quiet enemies, sharpened their knives, and the world he ruled threatened to collapse. Elena felt it every time she left his side, the looks from the guards, the whispers from the men, the fear in their voices. The moment Dante fell, the throne cracked, and everyone wanted a piece of what remained. On the fourth night, something inside her snapped, a quiet flame turning into a roaring fire. She walked out of the hospital straight into the storm of rain, soaking her hair, clothes, her skin. She didn't stop, she didn't breathe until she reached Dante's mansion, the place that once caged her now, begging her to step inside and claim it inside. The study, his lieutenants argued loudly, the room filled with men who had served Dante for years, yet none of them knew how to lead without him. "We need a temporary head," one shouted. "We need protection," said another. "We need a Romano," someone demanded. Elena stepped into the doorway silently. The moment her presence brushed the air, the entire room fell still. 20 hard men turned to stare at the mafia bride they once dismissed as fragile, their shock sharp and piercing. She walked forward without trembling, her spine straight, her chin high, her eyes burning with a strength they had never seen. "You all serve the Romano name, don't you?" she said, her voice steady, unshaken. One man scoffed with respect. "Mrs. Romano, you are not." She slammed her hand on the desk with a crack that silenced everything. "Or I am exactly that," she said, "the wife of the man whose empire you now cling to." Her voice slipped through the room like a blade, quiet, sharp, lethal. "Mr. Romano will recover," she continued, "but until he opens his eyes, you follow me or you face him when he wakes up." The silence that followed felt like thunder. Then slowly, one by one, the men bowed their heads, acknowledging her authority, not because she was Elena Moretti, but because she was Dante's wife, Dante's fire, Dante's equal, now forged by blood, not ceremony. That night, Elena took control of everything. She signed papers, ordered reinforcements, strengthened alliances, and threatened enemies with a coldness that made even the oldest lieutenants glance at her twice. She rebuilt the power Dante had almost lost, layer by layer, piece by piece, her mind sharper than fear, her heart steady, even when breaking days blurred into nights and nights bled into days, until finally one afternoon, as rain tapped softly against the hospital window, Dante opened his eyes. His vision blurred at first, shapes merging into shadows, until he saw her standing by the window, her hair falling over her shoulders. Her voice low but firm as she spoke into the phone, giving orders the same way he once did. When she turned and saw him awake, she froze, the phone slipping from her fingers, her breath leaving her in one shattered exhale. Dante watched her the way a drowning man watches the surface breaking through at last. "What are you doing?" he whispered, his voice rough, strained. Elena walked to his bedside slowly, her eyes filling, but her expression strong, stronger than the woman. He once dragged into a forced marriage stronger than the girl. He once believed he could break you running your empire until you're strong. Enough to take it back, she said softly, brushing the hair from his forehead. Her touch trembling with emotion, she tried to hide Dante. Stared at her for a long moment, then a weak chuckle escaped him. You've changed, Bellamy, he breathed. No, she whispered. Leaning closer, you just finally let me be who I am, and for the first time since the night he married her, Dante Romano saw Elena not as a prisoner, not as a debt, not as a fragile thing he needed to control, but as a queen standing beside a king, a woman forged in fire, stronger than any enemy he ever faced. But the night was not done with them, not yet, because when Dante returned to the mansion weeks later, healed enough to walk the rooftop garden lit with soft golden candles, he held something. In his hand, a small silver box trembling slightly before he opened it. Inside was the photograph Elena had seen long ago. The woman he lost, the ghost he couldn't bury, but beneath it was another document, one he had hidden for months, the truth he feared more than death itself. Elena looked up, confused, Dante's voice breaking as he whispered the final truth. You were never meant to be a payment, Elena. Your father wasn't in debt to me. He was involved in the murder of the woman I loved. I took you to destroy him, but I fell in love with you instead. The world seemed to stop around them, her breath leaving her body, her heart shattering not from betrayal, but from the devastating honesty of what he held inside him all this time. And in that moment, the final secret, the darkest truth, stood between them like a final test, the kind of truth that could destroy a fragile love or forge an unbreakable one. The chapter closed not with certainty, but with fire, not with peace, but with truth. And Elena understood something. Loving Dante Romano was never meant to be safe. It was meant to be a war she had to choose every single day.